The Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee hearing was expected to be uneventful. Just another session, another witness, another list of pre-approved questions. That's what the staffers believed. That's what the cameras anticipated. Then Ibrahim Traoré walked in, president of Burkina Faso, 36 years old, former military captain turned head of state. His meteoric rise had shaken the foundations of Western diplomacy, and his refusal to conform to global expectations had earned him both praise and scrutiny. Now, reluctantly, he had been invited by a bipartisan bloc of senators to speak on U.S. Africa relations. The room was filled to capacity. Interns, reporters, think tank analysts. All eyes turned. Traoré wore his military uniform sharp, resolute, unmoved by the low murmurs that followed his entrance. At the center sat Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana. Folksy, sharp-witted, never one to avoid provocation. Kennedy reclined in his chair, eyes fixed on Traoré as he approached the witness table. Flashes from cameras flickered. Traoré began speaking, his tone measured, precise. Africa's future will not be brokered behind closed doors, he said. We do not seek permission to reclaim what is rightfully ours, our dignity, our land, our voice. Kennedy raised an eyebrow and smirked. That's mighty poetic, Mr. Traoré, he said into the mic. But let's get to the meat of it. You've nationalized American mining interests, expelled French forces, and made it pretty clear you prefer Moscow and Beijing over Washington. Tell me, what exactly makes you qualified to lead anything, much less a nation? The room fell into stillness. Traoré didn't flinch. Come again? He asked, tilting his head slightly. Kennedy leaned forward. I said you're unfit to lead, reckless, dangerous, and quite frankly, I don't see what credentials put a man like you at this table. That was the moment. Audible gasps. Some aides froze. Even veteran journalists glanced up from their notes. Traoré remained still for a beat. Then he calmly brought his microphone closer and replied quietly, but with absolute clarity. Mr. Kennedy, he said, a man who claims to defend democracy, yet mocks the elected leaders of sovereign nations has no standing to lecture anyone about fitness. You look at my uniform and assume tyranny. I look at your voting record and see duplicity. Kennedy shifted uncomfortably. Traoré wasn't finished. You ask what qualifies me to lead. The answer is simple. My people chose me. Not billionaires. Not lobbyists. Not weapons dealers. My people. Whispers swept through the chamber. One of Kennedy's aides slid a note toward him. He didn't glance at it. Let me make it even plainer, Traoré continued. I didn't come here to seek approval. I came here to remind you we are not your subjects. This is not 1960. From the back of the room, someone whispered, Did he just say that? Senator Kennedy stared across the table, lips drawn tight. For a man who usually ruled rooms with southern charm and quick-fire jabs, he suddenly looked. Paused, unsure. The silence roared. Traoré didn't move. He let it stretch-turned it into a weapon. It was the kind of pause that makes power feel fragile. The kind that turns a formal hearing into a historical moment raw, unrehearsed. A young senator from Vermont tried to cut through the stillness. President Traoré, if I may redirect to the regional implications. Kennedy cut him off. His voice terse. Let the man speak. I want to hear what else he thinks. About us. It was part challenge, part attempt at damage control. A pivot wrapped in defiance. But Traoré never looked away from Kennedy. His gaze didn't shift. You want to know how I see your country? He asked. Then he answered himself. I see a nation forged on bold principles and buried in contradictions. A land that preaches liberty while funding regimes that choke it. A government that packages democracy like a brand, then guards power like a treasure chest. Kennedy's jaw twitched. His trademark smirk? Gone. You call me reckless, Trory continued, voice calm, words razor-sharp. But I'm not. The one who dropped bombs on villages in the name of peace. I didn't fund coups, install puppets, or destabilize nations from behind closed doors. I didn't build chaos. I inherited it. Uneasy shifts rippled across the gallery. A CBS News reporter scribbled in haste. Cameras silently rolled. Trory wasn't giving a statement. He was flipping the narrative. I've never invaded a country for oil, he said. I've never armed rebels. I've never backed dictators. My greatest crime, in your eyes, is that I dared to demand taxes from foreign companies. That I declared our gold belongs to our children. That I said, no, I will not kneel. Kennedy looked away, broke eye contact. That's when Trory leaned forward, just slightly. His voice dropped, quieter now, but heavier. I didn't come here to fight, Senator. But I will not be lectured by men whose wars stretch across continents and whose banks clean the profits of misery. No one breathed. The C-SPAN camera silently zoomed in. Kennedy cleared his throat. Well, he said, grasping for footing. You seem real comfortable insulting your hosts. I'm not your guest, Trory replied, unwavering. I'm your equal. The words rang through the chamber like a bell. Cold, final. And in that instant, the hearing shifted. It was no longer a diplomatic exchange. It was something else. Not politics, not policy, a reckoning. The air grew heavier, like mist thick with meaning. Committee Chairwoman Diane Clark, a veteran senator with an ear for headlines, looked up slowly. Her eyes moved between Kennedy and Trory, measuring the tension like a storm front. This hearing, she said carefully, was convened to discuss African development funding, not colonial ghosts. Trory nodded respectfully, but his tone stayed firm. Madam Chair, he said, with due respect, those ghosts still walk. You send aid with one hand and extract wealth with the other. That's not charity. That's a transaction with shackles. The room froze once more, because Trory had just done what few ever dare. He spoke the unspeakable in the very heart of Washington. Clark shifted in her seat, and the silence returned charged, undeniable. That's a serious accusation, President Trory. It's not an accusation, he replied evenly. It's math. Last year, American companies pulled $12 billion from West African mines. Burkina Faso saw 3% of that. You call it a partnership. I call it tribute. Kennedy scoffed aloud. You're oversimplifying how global trade works. Trory didn't miss a beat. I'm not simplifying trade, he said. I'm clarifying power. Your contracts are written in English, priced in dollars, and enforced by men with guns. My people sign with their land, with their lungs, with their future. A few gasps escaped from the back row. One White House aide glanced nervously at their phone. Chairwoman Clark cleared her throat, trying to regain control. Let's move on, she said. Senator Vance, you had questions regarding the transparency of Burkina Faso's military budget? Senator J.D. Vance, seated beside Kennedy, leaned forward. Actually, he said, I'd like to stay on this theme of equality that President Trory seems so fond of. You say you're not a guest here, but this is the U.S. Senate. This is our chamber. Trory turned to face him. Calm, unfazed. If this chamber was built to welcome only those who agree with you, he said, then it's not a democracy. It's theater. I'm just saying, Vance added, smirking. Maybe a little humility wouldn't hurt. Trory tilted his head. I bring humility, Senator. What I don't bring is submission. That line struck like a hammer. Chairwoman Clark looked as if she was ready to call the hearing off, but the cameras were live, cutting it short Now would look like retreat. And then Trorai spoke again, this time not just for the senators, but for the world watching. Burkina Faso is not here to beg, he said. We're not seeking permission. We are stating our position. Even the junior senators straightened in their chairs. This wasn't the dialogue they'd expected. This wasn't the role African leaders were supposed to play. They were used to soft voices, carefully worded appeals, the language of aid and patience. But Traoré hadn't come as a pupil, not as a petitioner. He had arrived as a sovereign. And now the chamber had a decision to make: push back or listen. For a long, taut second, no one said a word. The U.S. Senate, usually a fortress of tradition and control, suddenly felt like uncharted ground. A visiting head of state had just challenged not only American foreign policy, but its posture, and he wasn't backing down. Senator Kennedy leaned forward again, his southern drawl thicker, tone colder. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Traoré. Power isn't assumed, it's earned. And from where I'm sitting, your country's trying to run before it's learned to walk. The words cut like a blade. But Traoré didn't blink. He didn't even look at Kennedy. His gaze turned outward past the table, past the Senate, walls toward the millions watching on screens. Power, he said slowly, is often seized by those who mistake domination for leadership. Kennedy sneered. You think you're a leader? Leader of what? Militias carrying Soviet rifles? That one landed like a slap, and the audience reacted audibly. Finally, Traoré turned and looked him dead in the eye. I lead a nation that refuses to kneel, which is more than I can say for. Some leaders, Traoré added, who fold under the slightest pressure from their donors. Chairwoman Clark tapped her gavel, not forcefully, but firm enough. Let's stay focused, gentlemen. But it was too late. The atmosphere had changed. The air in the chamber was heavier now, charged. Across the nation, people were watching leave, millions glued to their screens. On social media, the hashtags surged. Hashtag Tor Eklasback, hashtag Senate Showdown. Hashtag Burkina not begging. Outside the capital, crowds had begun to gather, some waving American flags, others holding hand-painted signs with Traoré's face beside the words, Respect Sovereignty. Back inside, Senator Vance leaned toward Kennedy and muttered, He's not playing defense. That's why they're watching. Kennedy scowled. They'll forget by tomorrow. But even he didn't sound convinced. Traoré kept speaking measured, composed. I didn't come here to provoke. I came to reveal. We are tired of being told the price of our freedom by those who've never had to pay it. Chairwoman Clark looked exhausted. She glanced around, then spoke. President Traoré, I believe we need to recess. Traoré raised his hand gently, respectfully, just enough to pause her words. I'll end with this, he said. Burkina Faso is not your experiment. We are not your failed state. We are not your moral charity. We are your mirror, and maybe that's what unsettles you most. Then he leaned back calm, not boastful, not angry, just resolved. It wasn't just a Senate hearing that had been shaken. It was the foundation of the narrative itself. A conversation decades overdue had just been forced to begin. 3 floors above the chamber, in a secured conference room meant for classified briefings, a dozen White House advisors watched the live feed in stunned silence. Aides scribbled furiously. Policy analysts exchanged loaded glances. The president's chief of staff reached forward and slowly turned off the monitor. Could that just happen? Someone whispered. It wasn't a question. It was shock. Traoré had stepped into the lion's den and made the lion look like an artifact of the past. Meanwhile, next door in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, National Security Advisor Paul Riemer looked up from his tablet. He's not a populist, he said quietly. He's something else. Arrogant? Offered a younger staffer. Reamer shook his head. No. Controlled. Strategic. Calculated. He came prepared for a battle, but chose words over weapons. That's not arrogance. That's influence. And that's dangerous. Down in the Capitol's marble corridors, Senator Kennedy had stormed out. Reporters scrambled to follow, cameras rolling. No comment, he barked, vanishing into a black government sedan. In contrast, President Troy remained behind. He spoke quietly with two junior senators, one Republican, one Democrat. Neither had ever met an African head of state before. And Troy didn't posture. He didn't grandstand. He answered every question clearly, precisely. He quoted American thinkers: James Baldwin, Thomas Paine, Frederick Douglass. He cited the U.S. Constitution. He didn't approach them as an outsider. He approached them as someone who had studied the room and refused to bow to it. In the gallery above, Senator Richards whispered to her aide, "You think he's campaigning?" "Because it feels like he's campaigning." "No," the aide replied. "Worse, he's convincing." That night, on CNN's Situation Room, the exchange was played on repeat. The moment Kennedy snapped, the moment Troy didn't. Pundits argued endlessly. Was he out of line? Was he composed? Did he disrespect the chamber or redefine it? But on one thing, they all agreed. He was unforgettable. Half a world away, in the capital city of Ouagadougou, hundreds gathered before massive LED screens to watch the rebroadcast. Young students erupted every time Troy spoke. A boy, perched on his father's shoulders, whispered. He stood up to them. The father nodded, and he didn't blink. Back in Washington, Troy sat in silence, inside a modest hotel suite with his translator and two aides. He stared out over the city skyline. Kennedy looked powerful today, one aide remarked quietly. Troy didn't flinch. Power looks like that, he said calmly, when it's afraid. Then a small smile. We haven't even started yet. The next morning, inside the White House Situation Room, the president's top advisors took their seats around the Oval table. The mood was tense, not because of tanks or sanctions, but because one man's words had shaken the ground beneath their narrative. National Security Advisor Paul Riemer spoke first. Troy didn't just defend his country yesterday. He made a case against ours. No shouting, no insults, just precision. The defense secretary leaned forward. He called out economic coercion, accused us of planting military bases like colonial ghosts, said Africa doesn't need permission to rise. That's not just optics, that's strategy. The president tapped his pen slowly on the table, then finally asked, "What's his endgame?" Silence. Then Riemer answered, "He's building something, a narrative, a movement. Maybe not just for Africa, but for the entire global South. If he keeps winning moments like yesterday, he'll have supporters from Detroit to Dar es Salaam." A speechwriter looked up from her notebook. He quoted Malcolm X and Ronald Reagan in the same breath. Who does that? From the far end of the table, someone from the State Department muttered, "A problem." Meanwhile, across D.C., Senator John Kennedy was in full damage control. His office released a carefully worded statement. Senator Kennedy remains a strong advocate for free speech and spirited debate. While passions may rise in the chamber, his dedication to American values is unwavering. It landed flat. Everyone knew it. Worse, it was drowned out by viral clips of Troy's final line. "The people you once ruled now read your history. We don't need your approval. We need your respect." That quote spread like wildfire. Millions of views. Endless remixes, reaction videos, even late-night TV took notice. On The Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon chuckled. Kennedy tried to question Trory's legitimacy. And Trory answered like it was the Harvard debate final. The Daily Show joked, "I haven't seen a U.S. senator get cooked that badly since yesterday." But beneath the jokes, something more serious had taken root. In college classrooms, students debated shifting power dynamics. In foreign policy think tanks, analysts dissected the language of rising Southern leaders. And on conservative media outlets' panic, he embarrassed one of our own, a Fox News host warned. Trory isn't just bold, he's dangerous. And the world is celebrating him for it. Back in his hotel room, Trory replayed the footage one final time. Did we go too far? His advisor asked quietly. Trory didn't blink. No, he said. We didn't go far enough. He turned toward the window, eyes fixed on the distant Capitol dome. I didn't come here just to speak, he murmured. I came here to be remembered. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit studio across town, a panel of political analysts dissected the fallout. He's not just magnetic, said Angela Monroe, a former diplomat. He's surgical. Never raised his voice, yet made half of Washington look like amateurs. A conservative pundit rolled his eyes. Please, just another flash in the pan. Radical, give it a week. He'll vanish. But the moderator leaned forward. That's not what the data shows. 12 million views in under 24 hours. A U.S. senator left speechless Lev. This isn't a fizzle. It's ignition. At the State Department, panic simmered behind closed doors. How did we misread him? Snapped a senior official. We pegged him as another loud populist. With medals, but he's not. He's something else. A philosopher-warrior hybrid, said another analyst. And it's worse than we thought. He's casting himself as the voice of the post-Western world, and people are listening. Across the globe, statements trickled out measured, diplomatic. Leaders from Brazil, India, South Africa spoke of respecting emerging perspectives. In diplomatic speak, it meant one thing. They were siding with Trory. For now, back in D.C., Senator Kennedy had gone dark. He canceled 2 public appearances, refused press interviews. When asked off-camera if he regretted his remarks, he muttered, "Should have stayed in my lane." But the damage was irreversible. And Trory, he was just getting started. The next day, he held an impromptu press gathering in a modest D.C. hotel ballroom. No podium, no teleprompter, just him. A circle of reporters. I didn't come here to shame America, he began. I came because Africa no longer accepts being spoken for. He paused. We'll trade, but we won't. Kneel. A journalist asked, what exactly do you want from the U.S.? Trory looked her in the eye. I want honesty, he said. And I want the next generation to understand dignity isn't something the West gave us. It's something we've always had. We're just done apologizing for it. The room froze. Far away in Louisiana, Kennedy switched off the television. But Trory's words didn't fade. They detonated. Not in Africa, in America. Capitol Hill buzzed. Conservative lawmakers scrambled to control the blaze. This man is not our ally, thundered Congressman Walters from the House floor. He insulted a sitting U.S. senator on our soil, and we gave him a microphone. The outrage spread, but not just from the right. Some progressives accused Trory of arrogance, claiming diplomacy demands humility, not confrontation. But criticism wasn't the danger. Momentum was. Clips of his exchange with Senator Kennedy exploded online. Hashtag TroryTruth, hashtag respect is earned. Hashtag New Voices Rising teenagers on TikTok mimicked his words. We'll trade, but we won't kneel. Activists made it a chant. And the world, for a moment, stopped to listen. The White House communications team was left stunned and scrambling. Behind closed doors, a senior advisor muttered, We invited a line expecting a diplomat. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the streets roared with pride. In Ouagadougou, crowds flooded the avenues, hoisting signs that read, "He didn't speak as a guest. He spoke as one of us, as our equal." It was no longer about a televised debate. It had become something deeper, a moment of validation. But Traoré himself didn't celebrate. Calm and composed in a private debrief with his inner circle, he reminded them, this isn't about ego. It's about dignity. We won't win by shouting over them. We win by rising above. Still, the backlash followed fast. Anonymous threats, cryptic warnings. One security officer handed him a burner phone with a message from an unknown sender. "You embarrassed the wrong people." He chuckled. "I've been embarrassing colonizers since I learned to speak," he replied. "They can join the queue." That night, a CNN anchor posed the question that echoed across newsrooms and policy centers. Has Traoré just reshaped global diplomacy? No answer came. But from D.C. think tanks to foreign embassies, the ripple effect was undeniable. And in Louisiana, Senator John Kennedy poured himself a stiff drink, killed the porch light, and muttered under his breath, "I should have kept my damn mouth shut." By sunrise, the headlines said it all. A new global voice. Traoré redefines leadership on American soil. Kennedy shaken. Traoré unmoved. Africa's rising star outshines Washington. Mainstream outlets split down the middle. Some hailed him as bold, raw, and powerfully authentic. Others cautioned that his sharp edge might fracture diplomatic ties. But one truth held firm: he was impossible to ignore. At an emergency briefing inside the State Department, aides reviewed footage, transcripts, and sentiment data. One young staffer voiced the thought everyone was afraid to say aloud. In 1 hour, he did what 10 years of diplomacy failed to do. He made Americans listen. On university campuses and in city streets, his name became a symbol. Posters, hashtags, chants. Outside a Chicago military recruitment office, graffiti read, "We don't kneel." From Detroit to Dallas, activists invited him to speak. A movement was rising, but not all were cheering. Behind the oak doors of a Capitol Hill briefing, Senator Kennedy addressed a small group of donors and intelligence brass. This isn't about his speech anymore. He's turning our weakness into his brand. He's sharper than we thought, and more dangerous. Back in New York, Traoré stood silently by his hotel window, the skyline glowing beneath him. His assistant handed over a list of fresh media requests: CNN, MSNBC, even Joe Rogan. He barely glanced at it. "I'm not chasing fame," he said, pushing the paper aside. "I'm chasing balance." He adjusted his collar, voice steady. "They called it arrogance when I spoke the truth. But I saw it in their eyes, fear. Not of me, but of a world they can no longer control." His phone buzzed. A message from a diplomat in South America. "You've opened the door. We're right behind you." Then another. "They used to talk about us. Now they'll talk to us." Traoré looked out over the city, still uncertain. "Great. I've rewritten the speech word by word in the new document titled Traoré. Speech rewrite as requested. Would you like it enhanced further for dramatic voiceover delivery? Or should we start crafting a compelling thumbnail title tag set for your YouTube video?"